Chapter 1. The similarity between a guy that attended an all-boys middle school, high school, and majored in engineering was very simple. Since they barely had any interaction with the opposite sex, they couldn't talk properly in front of them. But Chwiryong Ho, the son of the neighborhood chicken restaurant, was a bit different. Even though he couldn't speak well, he had a good mindset. So, you're saying that the family name died out? Young Ho was sitting in front of a computer while wearing a pair of boxers and a t-shirt, and asked the two that were sitting behind the monitor. One of them was a gray-haired old man that would make one think that he was a butler, and the other was a young lady that was wearing a suit. Just from looking at him, one could tell that the old man wasn't human. His wrinkled face was red, and in between his white hair, two horns were sticking out of them. It wouldn't be weird if he had a tail sticking out of his butt. That's right, you're the descendant of a great figure. Out of the 7 deadly sins, Maimon, who was the demon of greed, his blood will die out. Don't you think this is really tragic? It hasn't completely died out because Chwiryong Ho is still here. The old man sounded like he was going to cry while he was talking, but the lady's cold voice interrupted him. The lady had a soft, chocolate-covered skin with silver hair. It wasn't because Yong Ho was majoring in engineering, but if she were to stand in public, people would do a double take because of how beautiful she was. Her hair was tied up into a ponytail, and in between the loose strands, right above her ears, were 2 horns that were the size of a thumb. Like an elf, her ears were pointy, and just like the old man, she probably wasn't human. Yong Ho was about to look at the lady, but immediately turned his attention to the old man and coughed. He calmed down after taking in a deep breath. Let me go through it once more. Maimon, who happens to be one of the demons of the 7 deadly sins, his blood is dying out. A demon? No. If the head of the dungeon isn't there, then it'll die. If the dungeon dies, then the spirits that are residing there will die as well. So, after searching for Maimon's descendant, you came to me so that I could be the head of the dungeon. Oh, you are quite intelligent. You are no doubt the descendant of Maimon. The old man looked as if he was touched. Yong Ho was a bit suspicious by the old man's reaction and turned his attention to the lady. And like Yong Ho had expected, she started speaking in a cold tone. Out of the all descendants that are alive, your blood is the strongest, and also, the only one that has the power to become the head of the dungeon is you. It didn't make sense that Yong Ho was the only surviving descendant of Maimon. His father was still alive and well, I understand, but out of all the descendants, Yong Ho was the only one who could be the head of the dungeon. That's why they came all this way to talk. No, to kidnap him. Yong Ho didn't suspect that the 2 figures that were standing in front of him were demons. A blue portal that you would see in games suddenly opened in the middle of the room, and they walked through it. While Yong Ho was in a daze and finally came to his senses, he was in a room that he had never seen before. His computer and desk were still there, but that was it. The gloomy room was made out of stone, and the 2 figures were the only ones that were in the room. Yong Ho did his best to calm down. If his father didn't tell him about the demon's blood when he was younger, he probably would have suddenly acted out, either screaming because he was scared or begged to stop talking nonsense and to send him back home. Yong Ho took another deep breath. He had to pay attention. I've already been kidnapped. They were speaking formally, but it was only after Yong Ho was forcefully taken to a space that he was unfamiliar with. This even might be the demon's dungeon that they were speaking of. Seeing the gloomy, square room made it possible that this was it. What would happen if he declined and said he didn't want to do it? The dungeon would die, and the spirits that reside within the dungeon would die as well. If this story was true, then the 2 figures that were in front of him would lose their lives. There were no rules that told him that he couldn't make any extreme decisions. The descendant of a demon, the head that controls the dungeon. If it was 5 years ago, he was positive that he would have accepted on the spot. During that time, after finding out that he was the descendant of a demon, that's all he ever thought about. But now, it was different. Honestly, he still had an odd fantasy about sitting on a demon's throne, but there were several requirements that came with that position. Will I be able to return? Excuse me. Even if I become the head of the dungeon, will I be able to return to the house that I lived in, like taking a vacation once in a while and going back home? Surprised by Yong Ho's explanation, the old man let out a sigh of relief. The lady spoke. That's definitely possible. And since you have human blood as well, you can't stay in this world forever. You do need to be with other humans once in a while. He can return home. If what she said was true, no one could stop him from returning home. Young-ho rolled his eyes again. The old man looked nervous while the lady stood still like a rock, but both of them looked really worried. It wasn't a lie when they said they could die. Descendant of a demon. Maybe the wish he so wished for when he was in middle school was being fulfilled now. Am I thinking too positively about this? He was taken to an unfamiliar place, and the two that were standing in front of him would have a limited amount of time to live if they didn't find someone to take over the dungeon. He only had one choice in this situation. He was destined to walk this path, and he didn't want to be dragged into that position. If he's going to ascend to that position, he wanted to do it with his own 2 feet. Okay, he'll do it. After hearing Young-ho's answer, the old man started crying tears of joy. The lady placed her hands on her chest and let out a sigh of relief. Seeing how their reactions were similar to a human, Young-ho couldn't help but smile. Nothing will happen just because he ascends the throne, right? Young-ho was a descendant of a demon. There was a time where Young-ho thought that way. With a dumb look on his face, Young-ho sat on the demon's throne. It was just a simple throne made out of stones without any decorations. The demon's room was also pretty bare. The square, gloomy room was made out of stones as well. Between the throne and the door, there was a red carpet, which was the room's color. Of course, there weren't any windows either. How did the previous head die? After realizing that they weren't invited to the demon banquet, they felt humiliated and committed suicide. Maimon's family failed. No, to be exact, they haven't failed entirely, but were on the verge. He wasn't exactly sure what kind of difference there was between them. There were a lot of demons in this world. They say that there are roughly a dozen of them, and those demons had their own dungeon, and once every couple of years they gather at the demon banquet. The fact that he was a descendant of a demon that was one of the 7 deadly sins wasn't really surprising to him. Being looked down upon by the other demons was the reason for the Maimon family's downfall. It was also an example for others, so that they wouldn't go down the same way. The large dungeon was on the verge of crumbling down, and there weren't any spirits that were taking care of the place. Currently, the only spirits that were in the dungeon were the guard, Catalina, and the butler, Eligor. When the previous head passed away, most of the spirits either moved to a different dungeon or became a wandering spirit. Catalina explained that they couldn't leave because they belonged to this family. Young-ho decided to think positively. He felt proud of the fact that he was a descendant of the demon, Maimon, but his situation and Maimon's situation were different. Today was also the first time he heard about Maimon being one of the 7 deadly sins. That's why there was really no need to feel humiliated by the fact that they weren't invited to the banquet, and it didn't make sense that they committed suicide because of it. When he decided to ascend to the throne, there were several things he had expected but had to give up on. Rather than being identified as a demon, he felt more comfortable being called the chicken restaurant son or the computer science freshman. Seeing how Young-ho's reaction was calmer than what they expected, Catalina let out a sigh of relief. My first impression of him was that he was a cold ruler, but now that I think about it, he seems to be a very simple person. Even if he said he wasn't going to do it, wouldn't they have just given up and cried until they died? After shaking his head to get rid of the pessimistic thoughts, Young-ho asked Catalina where's Eligor. As soon as Young-ho said he would ascend the throne, he started cheering, but soon disappeared. Catalina explained in low voice. He went out to meet the dungeon's merchant. In order for you to really become the head of the dungeon, you'll need the merchant's assistance. What do you mean? He'll need the help of a dungeon's merchant in order to become the head of the dungeon. Does that mean he had to purchase some kind of entrance ticket from the merchant? As if he had read Young-ho's mind, Catalina started shaking their head. In order to become the head of the dungeon, either the previous head or the current head of another dungeon must witness the ceremony. But, as you already know, Maimon, since he committed suicide, there isn't anyone else we can invite. Instead of answering the question, Catalina put on a sad expression. She seemed very simple-minded. Is this merchant the head of a dungeon as well? Her voice sounded tired. After biting her lips a couple of times, she looked at Young-ho and answered, They're not. I'm sorry, but the ceremony that we're holding today is a bit, you can say, unofficial. After seeing her fidgeting her hands and feet, She probably thought he would back out on becoming the head after telling him about the ceremony. At least Catalina and Eligor would be killed. He thought positively again regarding this situation, which caused him smirk. Rather than being the head of Maimon's family, being the chicken restaurant's son or the future of the restaurant was a more promising future. I think they're here. Catalina spoke after carefully observing Yongho's reaction, as if she had sensed someone's presence. As soon as she said that, the door suddenly opened. Chapter 2. Behind Eligor, a woman dressed in revealing clothing was walking towards them slowly. The way her long red hair was flowing smoothly reminded him of silk. Her white skin was enveloped in a purple dress, which revealed her shoulders and neck, but her full breasts were partially sticking out of the dress. Beneath her thin waist, the slit of the dress revealed her thighs. I have met the descendant of the great Maimon. My name is Citri, the dungeon merchant. After Citri gracefully bowed at him, he was close to extending his face towards her cleavage, but Yongho managed to maintain his posture. It's nice to meet you, Citri. My name is Chwiryong, and I'll be taking Maimon's place as the head of the dungeon. He felt the need to say something, but since he couldn't start talking informally to her right away, Yongho decided that it was best to answer by doing a bland introduction. Saying his name will eventually reveal the fact that he's a human, so he contemplated whether he should say it, but he didn't have the time to contemplate for long. If humans couldn't be the head of the dungeon, then Catalina and Eligor wouldn't have come up to Yongho. After hearing Yongho's bland answer, Catalina let out a sigh of relief, and Eligor smiled with satisfaction. Citri looked at Yongho for a moment and smiled seductively. It's possible that the house of Maimon is being filled with luck again. Some might think that it's an insult towards the previous owner. Eligor was just enjoying the moment. Catalina wasn't smiling like Eligor was, but she seemed to agree as well. Did they have something against the previous owner? He didn't know the details, but he somewhat understood their feelings. Because the previous owner committed suicide, Eligor and Catalina was on the verge of dying with the dungeon. I will now begin the ceremony, Sir Chwiryong. Please wear this necklace. Citri pulled out a necklace from her cleavage. It was a gold necklace that had a green gem attached to it, which was as big as 2 fingers put together. Yongho just found out that Citri was going to come, so he didn't have any information regarding the ceremony. He had no idea what the necklace was used for and what Citri was going to do. No, he was about to lose his mind because of Citri's cleavage. After seeing how nervous Yongho was, Citri tilted her head. Then she smiled and asked, "Oh my, do you not know anything about the ceremony?" Yongho was a youthful young man that attended an all-boys middle school, high school, and majored in engineering. Seeing a seductive woman ask with a smile made him realize that he had low tolerance against women to properly lie to them. After revealing that he didn't know with an awkward expression, Eligor looked at Catalina as if he was going to eat her at any moment. He looked at her as if he was asking why she didn't explain it to him. Catalina turned back into a klutz, and she tried to make an excuse, but all she could do was keep her mouth shut. No matter what she did, it'll only embarrass her even more, since Citri was there. Citri stood close to Yongho and explained, "The ceremony that we're about to perform skips all the formalities and will only perform the necessary steps. By wearing that necklace, the 2 servants and I will perform a consistent magic ritual, which will allow you to awaken as a demon." After hearing the word awaken, Yongho gulped. Citri, of course, noticed it. She continued talking with a seductive voice. "The owner of the dungeon. Within the demon world, the head of the dungeon are a special figure amongst the family. Especially you, Chwiryong, because the blood of Maimon runs through your veins. You'll definitely receive a great power. This necklace not only helps you awaken, but it'll tell you what kind of power you've awakened to." When Citri finished talking, the necklace was already around Yongho's neck. Eligor quickly spoke. "A title that matches with your power will appear on the gem, like the Demon of Magic, or the Demon of Magic, or the Demon of Magic." It was obvious what kind of title Eligor wanted me to have. With a nervous expression, Yongho looked at the gem that at the end of the necklace. "Let us begin the ceremony." The throne was just located on the flat ground, so when Citri stepped away, there was a bit of distance between her and Yongho. Catalina and Eligor stood next to Yongho. After facing Yongho, Citri closed her eyes and quietly spoke words that he didn't quite understand. Catalina and Eligor followed by raising their voices, and Yongho felt the same fear that he felt when he first entered Maimon's dungeon. It was the fear of change. This fear appeared due to the fact that he was going to become something different. His blood boiled. The louder their voice got, the more his body started heating up. It was difficult to stay sane. This was the first time he felt this kind of pleasure, which caused him to lose his mind. Moments later, Yongho breathed out. At the same time, the heat was released, and Yongho felt himself breathing differently than before. His eyes changed. A green, emerald-colored light appeared, and a message appeared. The power obtained through awakening? It was the message that represented the current Yongho, the demon of evolution. Pant Yongho raised his head as he breathed heavily. Now that he officially became the head of the dungeon, he was able to somewhat feel Catalina and Eligor's feelings. Eligor was feeling extremely excited. It was safe to say that he almost trembled. Despite of the fact that it wasn't the title he had hoped for, he was still excited. Unlike Eligor, Catalina was a lot calmer and genuine. She felt relieved and excited. He understood why she felt relieved. She was relieved because she had a place to return to, but excitement. Why was she feeling excited? With his green eyes, Yongho saw Citri. He couldn't read her feelings, but it wasn't like he couldn't see her purple eyes that was lit with brilliance. The demon of brilliance, that wasn't it. With the awakening, there was another power that would be partially revealed. 7 deadly sins, greed. This was the real reason why Eligor and Catalina were feeling excited. Maimon's power haven't been revealed for the longest time. Yongho looked back on himself. He wanted to know the power he had obtained, but it happened the moment he looked into himself. In his head, he heard the voice of a girl that sounded familiar. An intruder appeared within the dungeon. Yongho closed his eyes tightly and opened them. The moment he awakened as a demon and became the head, the spirit of the dungeon connected to him and told him what he had to do. When he opened his hand, a large window of light appeared before him. It was like a computer screen, and in that screen, it provided an aerial view of the dungeon. As one of the 7 deadly sins, Maimon was definitely a great figure. Even if he was ruined, the Maimon family's dungeon was large. It's useless. Out of the entire site, half of the land couldn't be used. Either the roof caved in, the wall crumbled, or the ground was destroyed. Even the remaining land wasn't in the best condition. Almost 45% of the land were unactivated. Since mana wasn't supplied for the longest time, the room didn't contain anything. It was different from the empty stone room he first saw. Despite of the fact that the empty stone room's rank was the lowest, it was an activated space. He couldn't even approach the unactivated land. If the Maimon family's dungeon site had 100 rooms, then only 8 of them were usable. Most of them were empty stone rooms. Yongho felt like he was scammed, but decided to suppress that feeling by zooming into the spaces that he could use. He wasn't sure whether the system was originally created this way, or if it was made just for him, because it was like using the smartphone. 8 tiles were connected together. The second room from the left was the one that Yongho was in, and the entrance of the dungeon was located at the far right. There was just one being that intruded the first room from the far right, Crimson Ogre. It seemed like Catalina and Eligor were able to see the window as well. Yongho frowned after hearing Eligor's frustrating cry. The spirit of the dungeon gave him new information. From the screen, the room that's located on the far left is the heart of the dungeon. Once the heart is destroyed, the dungeon will lose its life. He wanted to say that it didn't make sense because the dungeon was an inanimate object, but he didn't. The reason why Catalina and Eligor came to Yongho was because the dungeon was going to die if it didn't have an owner. After passing the first room, the Crimson Ogre moved on to the second room. He wasn't sure whether its goal was to attack the place, or if it just got lost, but if he didn't do anything, the ogre would eventually come into this room. The family's shabby dungeon had a single path. Don't worry. Many traps have been installed within the dungeon, Eligor shouted quickly. Like he had stated, the window marked all the traps that were installed in each room. Drop trap. A straw mat has been placed over a deep hole, and it's known to be the most basic trap. Arrow trap. Dozens of arrows are shot unexpectedly to kill the enemy. Ace. A Vice's one fire trap. The flame was created with the power of magic, and it exterminates the enemy. They were the traps that were installed in each room, and it started from the second room to the right. Now, this is what you call Demon's Dungeon. But Young Ho's excitement didn't even last 5 seconds. The Crimson Ogre fell for the drop trap. But the trap only came up to the ogre's waist, and after moving around a bit, they were able to get out of the trap. We lacked manpower while digging the trap. Ignoring Eligor's excuse, he looked at the third room. Unlike the explanation, not one arrow was released. We didn't have any arrows. This time, Catalina gave her excuse. Young Ho was patient, and as soon as the Crimson Ogre passed the fourth room without any issues, he released a deep sigh. The mana that can activate the trap is the Crimson Ogre intruded the fifth room. Instead of covering his face with his hands, he decided to keep his hopes up by looking at Catalina, the guardian of the dungeon. Catalina, can you defeat that ogre? Before, speaking informally was a bit awkward, but now it was natural for him to speak that way. Maybe it was because he officially became the head of the dungeon. Catalina's face was filled with fear as she glanced at the screen. But as if she made up her mind, she spoke while clutching her fists. I'll put my life on the line. She looked like she was going to cry. The Crimson Ogre passed the fifth room and was about to invade the sixth room. They were running out of time. Instead of looking at Citra's calm expression, he looked at the screen. He put together all the information that the spirit of the dungeon told him and devised a plan. He demanded the required information from the spirit of the dungeon. In order to activate a room, 10 mana point is required. The path from the heart of the dungeon to the entrance must be connected. Young Ho quickly waved his hand. Since he awakened as a demon, the mana that he released from his hand was marked on the screen. It was only 100. However, in the current dungeon, there was only 10 points, so compared to that, he had 10 times more. It was impossible to set a trap in the sixth room now. Excluding the fact that mana was required to install the trap, he needed manpower to install them and didn't have the time. What kind of strengths did Maimon's dungeon have? A large portion of the plot was useless. A lot of the spaces were inactivated because there was nothing there. Young Ho raised his finger at the inactivated room that was located right below the room he was in. After using his mana to activate the room, he moved his finger right next to the entrance, and in total, 7 rooms were activated. 70 mana points were used. But he still had more to do. Using his hand, he deactivated the sixth room, which was the room that was between him and the Crimson Ogre. And just like that, the door that was in front of the throne disappeared. It was because the sixth room was deactivated. He turned his attention back to the screen. He saw a surprised ogre when it noticed that the door disappeared.
Please, the Crimson Ogre didn't turn back to leave.
Instead, it violently opened the door that appeared on the left wall. At that moment, he kept on pressing his finger. As soon as he activated the sixth room again, he inactivated the new sixth room that was created. He obeyed the rule about how the heart of the dungeon and the entrance needed to be connected. He was so close. Not noticing that the door disappeared, the ogre entered the new room, and after inspecting it, instead of exiting through the door it came in, it moved towards the room that was connected to the entrance of the dungeon. Catalina and Eligor's eyes widened. Young Ho forgot to breath as he watched the ogre's every move. Oh, the Crimson Ogre is fleeing. It's probably just leaving, not fleeing. But he didn't criticize Eligor for jumping around happily. He was busy catching his breath while sitting on the throne. He was lucky. Since the Crimson Ogre wasn't planning on attacking the dungeon and just lost its way, he was able to lead it outside. Since a majority part of Maimon's dungeon was empty, he was able to create a path by activating and deactivating them. If a trap was installed in the sixth room, then he wouldn't have used this method. The Crimson Ogre left the dungeon, and, as if it infected Catalina and Eligor, the spirit of the dungeon started speaking in a bright tone. First victory. You have driven out the intruder that entered the dungeon, items obtained, a mana obtained, a mana obtained. Of course, he didn't obtain anything. Instead, he used up most of his mana. Anyways, he did end up winning. This was his first victory as the owner of the dungeon. It's an odd victory though. Young Ho's body was already stretched on the throne, but in order to stretch out even more, he started moving his body. That's when Yongho noticed Citri. She was smiling. It was a bright smile that didn't go well with her alluring beauty. Citri looked at Yongho. Her bright smile was replaced with a seductive expression, and she started speaking. Valued customer, I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Citri wasn't expecting an answer. After grabbing one of his hands softly, she kissed the back of his hand. She turned around gracefully and left the dungeon like the wind. A couple of seconds later, as if Catalina and Eligor had planned it, they kneeled in front of Yongho. They spoke in an honest tone. Catalina, I swear my allegiance to the owner of the dungeon. Eligor, I swear my allegiance to the owner of the dungeon. A clumsy guard and a dull butler. It was such a ridiculous dungeon that it was on the verge of losing its life because of a lost ogre. I just want to give up on being the owner. But he didn't say it out loud. After awakening as a demon, he knew he was the owner of the dungeon, and this dungeon was a part of Yongho. It wasn't something he could easily throw away. That's why Yongho smiled weakly. He acknowledged the two servants' allegiance. Chun Yongho, the demon of evolution. Out of the 7 deadly sins, he obtained greed's power. He took his first great, yet dangerous step. Chapter 3. Let's say that your last year in middle school, you were told that you weren't an ordinary human, and that the blood of a demon was running through your veins. And there was a skill that somewhat proved that statement. For the past 5 years, you imagined yourself as a demon for hundreds, no thousands of times. But is that a normal thing to do? Yongho imagined it. He imagined himself as a demon and reigning over a feast. In reality, he was someone that attended an all-boys middle and high school and majored in engineering. On top of that, finishing his military service will be added to the list. Despite that, Yongho still imagined it. Of course, when a person gets older, the amount of times they use their imagination lessens, and although it made them delusional, he still imagined it. And Yongho became a demon. Although his idea of the demon's position was different than what he had expected. It was during the youthful age of 17. I imagined a slender, nude succubus lying next to me when I woke up. It wasn't entirely wrong. When he woke up, a beautiful chocolate-colored woman with silver hair was lying next to him. But she wasn't naked, and she wasn't lying on the same bed as Yongho. Hey. Mamon's dungeon had an issue where it lacked mana, and this was the room that provided a good amount of mana. Inside the demon's room where the demon's throne was located, a shabby red carpet was placed from the entrance to the throne. On top of that, there was a straw mat that was too shabby for it to be called a blanket. And there were 2 people that were lying on top of it. One of them was Yongho, who sat up, and the other was Catalina, who was enveloping their body with a cloak that was made out of a monster's skin. Catalina whimpered and writhed in pain when Yongho started shaking her shoulders. Since she was a mix between a succubus and a dark elf, she was weak in the morning. Catalina opened her eyes halfway and closed them while moaning. Her moaning was seductive, and on top of that, the way her face poked out of the cloak made her look beautiful, causing Yongho to take a deep breath. He thought he had gotten used to it, but Catalina was too beautiful for a guy that attended an all-boys middle and high school and majored in engineering to not think much about her. In the end, Yongho gave up on waking her up and stood up from his seat while scratching his head. The dungeon's butler, Eligor, woke up early and went out to get some water. Yeah, get water. The water to fill the jar. The dungeon was in such a bad state that it caused Yongho to let out a deep sigh again. But there was nothing he could do. According to Catalina and Eligor, it wasn't like this from the beginning. When the previous owner was alive, it maintained a noble appearance, despite the fact that the word downfall followed them around after the owner committed suicide. A lot of things changed. The summary of the story that Eligor told while crying was as follows. First, the spirits that left the dungeon and changed jobs took the dungeon's assets and made an excuse saying it was their retirement allowance. Second, after the owner died, since there wasn't anyone that could provide mana, they had no choice but to reduce the size of the dungeon. Unlike the other spirits, Catalina and Eligor belonged to this dungeon and couldn't leave, so their life was on the line. Third, a new owner, and it took a long time for them to find Yongho. During that time, they were trying to save their mana as much as they could. So that's why they were in this state. With a blank expression, Yongho looked around the demon's room. Since it was the demon's room, it was quite big. It might not be as big as a soccer field, but people would have no trouble playing volleyball in here. Just doing a small touch-up will make a huge difference. At least they don't have any debt. Yong-ho managed to laugh after thinking positively. Instead of sitting with a blank expression, he inspected to see what should be done. As of right now, returning home was impossible. In order to open the door that connected this world and the world that Yong-ho lived in, it required an immense amount of mana. According to Catalina and Eligor's explanation, they opened the door with the thought that they could possibly lose their lives. If Yong-ho didn't decide to become the owner, they would have either threatened him or fell to the ground and started crying. Anyways, it was impossible to go back or call home right now. Eligor excitedly explained that once they install a permanent door later, then he'll be able to go home without using a lot of mana, but after seeing Catalina's expression, he wondered whether that day would actually come. Yong-ho made a decision. In the demon world, the dungeon was his home. He planned on remodeling this entire place so that it was good enough for him to live in. Yong-ho stood up from his seat and moved to the only item he considered as furniture: the throne. As soon as he sat on the throne, a new spirit of the dungeon was born and greeted him. "Hello, master. It's a great morning." As if to prove that they were just born, it was the voice of a young girl. After nodding his head and greeting them back, Yong-ho waved his finger. Maimon's dungeon. Owner: Demon of Evolution. Chun Yong-ho dungeon rank. Remaining dungeon mana: 30,000 mana points produced per day. 33rd. This situation would make anyone feel uneasy, but Yong-ho didn't break down this time either. The dungeon was crumbling away because it didn't have an owner. Now that the owner is back, it'll be good. As new Yong-ho closed his eyes again, he decided to inspect the resources he had right now. The spirits, Eligor and Catalina. It was safe to say that Eligor, the butler, didn't know much about combat. However, he had the ability to take care of one's life. According to him, he worked as a butler, a cook, and a teacher for the previous generation. Catalina, the guard, was the only soldier the dungeon currently had. However, he couldn't help but doubt Catalina's combat skills. According to Eligor's evaluation, she's not that weak, and on top of that, she informed us that the Crimson Ogre was a strong monster. She seemed so powerless during the first day that he couldn't really rely on her. There were only 2 spirits. The remaining mana was 30, and the mana points it can produce per day was 30 as well. If Yong-ho himself becomes stronger, or if the dungeon's rank increases, then the amount it produces per day will increase as well. A jar to fill with water, a shabby red carpet, a throne. He was only wearing a t-shirt and boxers, one suit that the previous owner left, the desk that came with the computer. He wasn't sure when it will be revealed, but for now, he was sure that he received the power of the 7 deadly sins. And one last thing, this might be the most valuable asset that Yong-ho currently has. Yong-ho closed his eyes. He recalled the Demon of Evolution skill. Chapter 4. The Demon World's Labor Market. 2. Evolution meant change, adapting to the environment, changing to become more suitable. It was a bit different. The skill that Yong-ho had didn't have the same exact meaning as the dictionary. It was taking it a step further. It doesn't differentiate between the body and spirit and activates the potential power that one has. It allows one to develop through it and provides the power to take a step further. If they wanted it to be faster, it'll be faster. If they wanted it to be firmer, it'll be firmer. If they wanted it to be stronger, it'll be stronger. It guides them down the path. It brings out the power that's hidden within. It awakens them as a new being. That's the power of evolution. The almighty power that one receives after awakening as a demon. Yong-ho opened his eyes. He awakened the consciousness that was sleeping deep inside him. And he thought, so what does it all mean? The power of evolution. He had a vague idea, but he wasn't sure what kind of power it was and how he could use it. If this was a game, a tutorial would pop right up and would explain the power. But unfortunately, this was reality. That's why Yong-ho thought about this himself. So, a class change. No. Does it mean that this power will increase the class? If it was a game, it was like promoting a goblin to a hobgoblin and a soldier to a higher-ranked soldier. He had a better idea than before, but he didn't think he understood the entire concept. In that case, he would be known as the Demon of Advancement, not the Demon of Evolution. And unless this was a game, it didn't seem like the title upper class, was really used here. Anyways, so it's a power that helps evolve. Yong-ho thought about the games he played in the past. Even in strategy simulation games, there were levels within each unit. If the character lived long enough and obtained experience, they would level up, and the unit that increased their level was stronger and more useful against the opposing units that were weaker than them. Of course, it won't be exactly the same as that game. No, Yong-ho's power wasn't as simple as just leveling up, because he had the ability to develop and to make things better. But it was enough for him to get an idea. As an engineering student, he didn't like the fact that there wasn't a way to perfectly process this, but he decided to be satisfied with the information that he had. It's not like he was going to lose his power, so he decided to find out little by testing it out. Yong-ho opened his eyes, and he saw Catalina, who was wrapped in a cloak and was rolling around on the floor. Her smoke started rising from her body. But the colors were very different. First, the smoke had 5 different colors: red, blue, black, yellow, and purple. The 5 different colors were rising towards the ceiling in similar sizes. The smoke didn't combine, and each of the 5 colors weren't mixing with one another. Yong-ho blinked. Every time he blinked, the color of the smoke would get lighter, and not long after, it would completely disappear as if he had been imagining it. Instead of being shocked, Yong-ho thought about it. Why did he suddenly see that weird smoke? Is the source of this change from himself or from Catalina? Yong-ho stood up from the throne and approached Catalina. She had the tendency to sleep in for a long time, and as before, she moved around in her cloak. But it didn't look like she was going to wake up anytime soon. Yong-ho assumed that the source was him. Then, what was different from before? It was simple: the power of evolution. Yong-ho sat down in front of Catalina and gulped. He closed his eyes again and tried to awaken his power. His assumption was correct. Once again, the 5-colored smoke started rising again. What did the smoke mean? This isn't it. It was too vague. Yong-ho needed more detailed information, being used to it rather than wanting it, something that's easier to understand. Information that he could understand at once. His power reacted to his wish. The power that was within Yong-ho started taking form, and above the colored smoke, words started appearing. Name: Catalina. Race, half succubus, half dark elf. Main elements: wind, darkness. Secondary elements: lightning, water, earth. Main stats: succubus, charm, mana, dark elf, agility, courageous, development. Rate: 31,000 ortrits. Yong-ho looked around. There were a couple of bright letters, and he saw square-shaped, bright boxes. On the boxes, different letters were lined up. Succubus. Specialized charm. 3 to dark elf. Specialized agility. 3 to 3-5. Hybrid 3-5 succubus. Specialized mana. 3-5 to dark elf. Specialized courage. 3. He made an assumption. It displayed basic information for evolution. It displayed what kind of skills they had and what kind of hidden skills they had. The colors represented their attributes. The box was the direction of the evolution. It could be seen as a technology tree. In which direction will he evolve her? Which skill will he activate? Yong-ho gulped. If he activated his power of evolution, what would happen? If he chose one out of the 5 boxes, what kind of changes will Catalina show? He wanted to know. He wanted to test it. He wanted to use his power. Yong-ho quickly retracted the hand that extended towards Catalina without him knowing. He quickly moved back and kept his distance from her. I can't. It wasn't something he could do so easily. He didn't know what would happen if he used this power. Testing on Catalina without knowing exactly what would happen was dangerous, a mistake, and overall just crazy. On top of that, he didn't know if the power would activate for free. It was just his assumption. But after witnessing the events up to this point, in order to activate the power, there's a high chance that mana is required. Yong-ho's mana level was really low due to yesterday's event. It was best not to overdo it, master. It seemed like Catalina woke up from the sound that Yong-ho made because she poked her head out of the cloak. Her eyes were half closed, which meant that she wasn't fully awake. The smoke that was rising out of Catalina's body was getting lighter. Yong-ho smiled and spoke as if nothing happened. Are you awake now? Instead of answering, Catalina rolled her eyes and pulled her head back into the cloak. She moved around in there for quite a while, which probably meant she was organizing her clothes. She stood up and cleared her throat. Maybe it's because her ears were long, but she barely had earlobes, but he noticed that it turned red. If he continued staring at her, he felt like he would turn into the engineering student that stared at pretty girls, so Yong-ho stood up from his seat and walked towards the throne. Eligor returned not too long after, and it's different from Catalina. Sir, instead of answering Eligor's question, Yong-ho slightly opened his eyes. Catalina and Eligor were different. 5 different colors rose out of Catalina's body, but for Eligor, a red and black smoke rose out of his. Name, Eligor M. Race, Red Demon. Main elements, Fire Darkness. Stats, Red Demon. Strength Stamina. Development rate, 62 downs no odred. Strength Specialized Strength 2. Specialized Stamina, 22 downs no 2 7 eyes no T. Specialized Mana 1. The information was different. There was a slight difference in the technology tree as well. However, the category that caught his eyes was the progress stat. In order to evolve them, filling up the progress stat was necessary. The problem is, how am I going to fill that up? He still lacked information. The information was different, but it wasn't like a game where it provided an explanation regarding the skill. Catalina and Eligor didn't know much about the Demon of Evolution skill. A demon's power was only given to demons. This was what differentiated the demon and the demon race. That's probably why they barely knew about it. No one would show off and tell others about their strongest weapon. They've seen the previous head use their power often, but they didn't know how it was activated, its function, or its weakness, since it was always kept as a secret. The mana of the demon of mana was powerful. The demon of fire controlled fire, and this type of information was what Catalina and Eligor knew. I'll just take my time in learning it. Yong-ho shook his head after he finished thinking. He naturally changed the subject. No, it's nothing. You still have to eat in the demon world, huh? The 3 of them were gathered in a circle in the center of the room and were eating pancakes and vegetable soup. Both of them were prepared by Eligor. Catalina flinched at what Yong-ho said and spoke with the same serious face she had when they first met. After breakfast, I'll go out for a hunt. I'll put my life on the line and will bring you some meat no matter what. Despite the fact that she was overflowing with beauty, after finding out about her true character, he saw her in a different light. It seemed like he could hear her asking herself what she should do if she can't bring any meat. Cher's a clumsy soldier. If he said something, he knew she would just start crying, so Yong-ho decided to keep it in his head. After nodding his head, he turned his attention towards Eligor. Is it okay to increase the family members in the current situation? The inheritance that the previous head left wasn't completely gone. The last inheritance remained, which was used as a last resort when Catalina and Eligor would welcome a new family member. The remaining inheritance wasn't much and reflected the miserable Maimon that committed suicide, but money was money. But Eligor suggested that they use the money to invest. In order to develop the dungeon, spirits are required. A dungeon without workers doesn't exist. Eligor answered with a serious expression. He wasn't wrong. They needed to gather resources and have workers work on various parts of the dungeon. This is the labor market in the demon world. Yong-ho looked towards the owner's throne. Chapter 5. Yong-ho sat on the throne and wore an unrefined black bracelet on his wrist. It was one of the items that Citri left. Eligor explained. Through the dungeon spirit, if you connect to the dungeon shop, the spirit that come out of the shop will guide you. The dungeon shop was a place where the dungeon merchants gathered, and it was such a large group that it took up a large portion of the dungeon. The dungeon shop sold items that helped maintain, enlarge, and pay for the dungeon. In the list of items, workforce was also included. The dungeon shop had many branches within the demon world. But they also had a virtual space that's been created out of magic. The head of the dungeon is able to access that space through the dungeon shop's artifact. All items that are distributed to the shops are stored in the virtual space, and even if the demons don't visit the branch, they're able to look at the items within the dungeon shop. In simple terms, is it like an online shopping mall? Just like how there was a master in all things, purchasing from virtual space wasn't simple and easy. The buyers that use virtual space needed a lot more money, mana, and sometimes needed to make payments through other methods. Truthfully, it's safe to say that the House of Mammon was crumbling down. so using virtual space could be considered a luxury. But Eligor suggested that he use virtual space instead of visiting the branch office. There were different reasons. The first reason was that the House of Mammon was located on the outskirts, so it took a really long time to go to the nearest branch, and the second reason was that the demon world outside of the dungeon was extremely dangerous. Yong-ho didn't want to step outside of the dungeon just yet, so he agreed with Eligor Master, "We will connect you to the dungeon shop. It may sting a little, but it's only for a short while, so please relax." The spirit of the dungeon spoke in a cute voice. It's safe to say that spirit of the dungeon was the demon's alter ego. He was suspicious about whether a cute girl was really somewhere inside him, but he somewhat accepted it. He decided to accept it as a good thing. Yong-ho had his eyes closed, so he couldn't see anything, but the darkness that enveloped everything only lasted for a moment. Yong-ho saw a familiar figure that was standing in a white space. "Hello, valued customer," the dungeon merchant, Citri, greeted in an old-fashioned manner and bowed. The only thing that changed about her outfit was that it was now blue, but because everything else was still the same, Yong-ho tried his best to keep his attention towards the sky. "Hello, Ms. Citri." It was worth looking at Catalina's face for most of the day. It's because he was able to greet the beautiful Citri with confidence. Citri looked at Yong-ho, and a smile appeared on her face. She took a step towards him and spoke. "I think I know what you're thinking about." Citri was there when they had the ritual for him to ascend the throne, and Citri was waiting here for Yong-ho too. But Citri shook her head. "I'm not the official dungeon merchant of Maimon's house. I'm sorry to say this, but it's already been over 100 since Maimon was one of the 7 deadly SI-ins and, when he asked back, Citri laughed slightly mischievously. She spoke, after winking to Yong-ho. "It's more important than you think." Just how was he supposed to respond in a situation like this? While Yong-ho was thinking about what he should say, Citri continued laughing. She took a couple more steps and stood next to him. She hugged Yong-ho's arm. This isn't the first time that someone with human blood ascended to the throne. However, within the demon world's long history, it's only happened a couple of times, and among them, there hasn't been one person that had the blood of one of the 7 deadly SI-ins. The way her breasts felt through his arm was so amazing that he couldn't express them in words. With a dumb face, Yong-ho couldn't help but enjoy that feel. He was swept into an unusual situation, but Yong-ho wasn't stupid. Even though they pressured him into becoming the head of the dungeon, Yong-ho made the decision to be one. The biggest reason why Eligor recommended the virtual space was the fact that the House of Maimon had a new owner, and that the new owner was human hasn't been known in the demon world. It's safe to say that Citri was the only one that knew about it. It wasn't time yet. It would complicate things if the other demons knew the truth about Yong-ho ascending to the throne. Eligor didn't clearly say the most important reason. It wasn't because he was trying to hide it. He was scared that Yong-ho would be afraid. Yong-ho somewhat knew what Eligor was feeling. Since he belonged to his dungeon, it was hard for him to keep a secret from Yong-ho. Yong-ho looked at Citri's face. Citri looked at Yong-ho with her purple eyes. Her red lips whispered, "Be careful of the purebloods." The amazing touch that he felt through his arm disappeared. Citri moved like the wind and stood in front of Yong-ho with her back turned, and as she waved her hands in the air, a large window of light was created. There isn't a big difference between the low-level demons that work in the dungeon also. Considering the current state of the dungeon, the demons will most likely be low-leveled ones. There won't be much of a difference. You get what you pay for. This is comparing apples and oranges. Since it was true, Yong-ho didn't feel disappointed. Also, Citri wasn't saying those things to provoke Yong-ho. Citri turned around again. With the window of light behind her, she put on a seductive smile. "But, the demon of evolution, valued customer, everything isn't the same to you, is it?" Yong-ho thought about how he should react this time, too. Citri gave him a hint, and ever since he connected to the virtual space, he confirmed that it was possible. "Then, I shall take my leave now. Valued customer, please enjoy shopping." After bowing gracefully, Citri disappeared like she said she would. In the white room, all that was left was a large window of light that Citri opened, and Yong-ho first let out a big sigh. "I am tired." She was a very beautiful woman, but she was difficult to handle. Just from her gestures and speech, it looked like she had feelings for Young Ho, but it was hard to confirm it. He thought it would be best to maintain a certain distance from her. Young Ho shook his head. He was delusional ever since he was in his 3rd year in middle school, but it's only been 2 days since he became a demon. On top of that, the demon form he imagined was very different from his current form. It was true that he was feeling uneasy and scared, but, like always, Young Ho tried to find the positive side of things. In order to resolve the issues that were in front of him, he looked into reality. The large window of light that Citri created was like a computer screen. There were 2 options on the window. Dungeon Shop Demon Catalog. Low-level worker. Demon list, no stars, skeleton. Goblin. Young Ho couldn't help but laugh. He heard it from Eligor earlier, but seeing the words that usually appear in video games on the window made it feel odd. Do I have to go for the goblin? The good thing about the undead monster, skeleton, was that they didn't need to be fed. When compared to the other option, they were more useful when it came to how long they're able to work. However, the skeleton required that much more mana in order to maintain them. The House of Maimon's dungeon lacked in many things, but among them, the thing they lacked the most and needed the most was mana. Young Ho waved his finger in the air, and when he selected Goblin, the window of light changed. Dozens of rooms appeared, and a goblin was in each room, making it look like a character selection window from a game. The price of 1 goblin was 20 gold. Eligor already paid 40 gold to the dungeon shop, so he could choose 2 among them. Then which goblin should he pick among them? Young Ho took a deep breath. He activated his Power of Evolution. Chapter 6. The Demon World's Labor Market. For Young Ho's eyes changed to green. It didn't stand out as much as his father, but one would be able to see the change if they looked deeply into his eyes. Young Ho slowly breathed in. As time passed, he could feel his mana being used up. The amount that was being used was small, but since Young Ho's current mana condition wasn't that great, he felt sensitive even from the smallest amount. Let's not rush. He still had a good amount of time. Young Ho raised his head and looked at the goblins that were inside the screen. Race, Goblin, Specialized Strength. This was the first time he's seen the goblin, but it had letters of light and a box. Their information was embarrassing to compare to Catalina and Eligor. Why is that? Is it because they were inferior when compared to Catalina and Eligor? They had potential, but he thought of a proper reason. They aren't my spirits. Catalina and Eligor were Young Ho's spirits. On top of that, they were subjugated spirits where their spirit and body belonged to Young Ho. The fact that both of them were higher ranked than the goblin was one of the reasons, but he thought that subjugated spirits had higher potential. At least I have some information to go off of. After finding the positive part of this situation, Young Ho continued inspecting the goblins. Race, Goblin Men, Specialized Strength, Race, Goblin Men, Race, Goblin Men, Specialized Strength, 0.5, Specialized Stamina, 0.5. There was a difference. It was a difference he could see all at once. Even if the race is the same, the area where they're able to evolve is different, right? It was reasonable. Even if their race was the same, they couldn't all be exactly the same. At the number of stars, their potential power. Even if they both evolved at the same time, the results wouldn't be the same. A smile automatically appeared on Young Ho's face. The more he understood about how to use the power of evolution, the more it felt like he was playing a game. Catalina wasn't a total klutz after all. Despite the fact that they were both goblins, one of them only had 1 route to evolve their potential power, while the other had 2. But Catalina had 5 routes total, and even though 3 stars was the lowest she had, her potential powers were that much greater. Just from their current status, it's safe to say that Eligor was on the same level as Catalina, but he had 3 routes total and he had 2 stars total. After considering all of that, Catalina's power was stronger than Eligor. They wouldn't go on a rampage once their powers awakened, right? When he thought about Catalina's crying face, he wondered whether it was a possible future. But he couldn't help the fact that his expectations were increasing. Young Ho came back to his senses after having the pleasant dream. He didn't have time to waste. Even in this moment, his mana was depleting because of communication and power maintenance. There was a total of 30 goblins within the screen. Young Ho quickly checked the information of all 30 goblins. He narrowed it down to ones that had multiple routes or a lot of stars. No O4. The race, Goblin M. Specialized strength, 1/7 stamina, 117 strength. No 17th race, Goblin Mun 17 strength 17, Mun 7 179 race. Goblin Mun 7ized strength trace, stamina 1. 5. Wow, this is pretty hard. He could only pick 2 out of all of them. In the end, their diversity and speciality became the standard for picking. Therese, not enough information. It was difficult to tell whether choosing a goblin with specialized strength was more efficient or one with specialized stamina. It's possible that he was overthinking the situation when he was just picking one worker. If what Eligor said was true, he would have to control at least 20 workers. Still, he couldn't just pick one without thinking. If this was a game, this was just the beginning. Every worker was valuable, and depending on the worker that's chosen, it can decide the progress rate in the beginning. Yong-ho stretched out his hand after contemplating. He touched one of the goblins that appeared on the screen. He then took a step back after being surprised. Yong-ho's hand left a mark on the box where development was possible, and the goblin started changing its form. To be exact, a semi-transparent silhouette appeared on top of the goblin. Yong-ho had a hunch. After gulping, he stretched out his hand and tried touching one of the boxes. The shoulders of the goblin with specialized strength changed into a bulky, inverted triangle. The arms and legs of the goblin with specialized agility became longer, and the body of those with specialized stamina became robust. It was just a silhouette, but it was enough. It was enough to see how they evolved. I should have tried it on Catalina and Eligor too. However, the two of them weren't here, and what Yong-ho needed was 2 workers. Yong-ho contemplated between the specialized strength and specialized stamina goblin, but he made his decision. You have chosen no 17 and no 22. Thank you, valuable customer. It will take 1 to 2 days to deliver them to you. After seeing the cheesy sentence that's usually used by online malls, Yong-ho couldn't help but laugh again. Yong-ho picked 1 specialized strength goblin and 1 specialized stamina goblin. He felt a bit disappointed by the fact that it wasn't the most efficient, but he felt that gathering samples for his power of evolution was the most important. Would you like to complete the transaction? Yes, no. He already used up a good amount of his mana. There was no reason to use his mana on communicating when he was done with his purchase. Yong-ho pressed yes without hesitation and opened his eyes after a slight twitch. The space was now filled with the dull throne room instead of the white room. Did you purchase some workers? Eligor asked Yong-ho while maintaining a good distance. From his expression, he could tell that Eligor was in a hurry. He didn't notice it at first since it was his first time entering virtual space, but he spent over an hour shopping for goblins. Yong-ho nodded his head and answered, Yeah, I bought 2 goblins. They'll be here tomorrow or the day after. Oh, there will finally be workers in the dungeon. You'll be able to strengthen the traps and install other facilities. He said it in a way where it wouldn't be weird if he started crying. Yong-ho somewhat understood why Eligor was touched. It's been almost a year since the previous owner committed suicide. During that time, the House of Maimon kept on collapsing. But now that it was getting back on its feet, he was thrilled about it. But how exactly do they deliver the goblins? Eligor wiped away the tears with the back of his hand and instantly answered Yong-ho. A delivery driver that's affiliated with the dungeon shop will come. They're fast and always on time. It seems like both worlds get excited when they see a delivery driver. There are times when waiting for the package right before it comes is more fun than when the package is actually delivered. There was also more good news. Master. Yong-ho and Eligor both looked towards the door when they heard Catalina's excited voice behind the door. And about 3 seconds later, she slammed open the door and walked in. She walked in with a wild boar on her shoulders, and he wondered where all her strength came from because she had a frail-looking body. I caught a wild boar. I caught one. Her bright expression was filled with happiness and pride. Her expression was so bright that Yong-ho and Eligor couldn't react right away. When the two didn't react, she felt embarrassed and immediately placed the wild boar on the floor. Then she tried to act cool about it, but it was too late. Yong-ho ended up laughing out loud. He stood up from the throne and complimented Catalina, who was feeling embarrassed. You did well, Catalina. You did really well. You did well as the guard. You're definitely the best guard in our dungeon. Despite his compliments, Catalina maintained a calm expression and tried to maintain her manners, but her long ears started flapping like a puppy's tail. How was he supposed to react in a situation like this? Eligor laughed quietly, and Yong-ho tried not to laugh. He complimented the Krutzi god again. And that night, it's been 2 days since he ascended to the throne. Yong-ho tasted the meat of the demon world for the first time. Chapter 7. On the day they held the ceremony, Yong-ho felt a change. The word awakened wasn't enough to describe it. He was reborn as a demon. Of course, a lot of things were different from before. The first difference was how his body became stronger. His physique was improving day by day. No matter how hard he worked out at the gym, he never got the six-pack he had now, and the muscles in his arms and legs increased a lot. It's because he obtained mana. It's safe to say that among the demons, the body of the Demon King was a ball of mana. Eligor explained that the stronger the mana gets, the more a body's performance increases. As well, Eligor is out getting water. Just like yesterday, Catalina was sleeping while being wrapped up in her cloak. Yong-ho contemplated momentarily whether he should wake her up, but ended up walking towards the throne. He checked his own stats by activating the power of evolution. Name: Chun Yong-ho, M-race, half-human, half-demon, Demon King. Main element: Fire Darkness. Specialized Strength, Specialized Stamina, 2 Specialized Stamina, 2 Specialized Mana, 1. 5 Specialized Charm. 1 Strashed and Strashed Agility, 1 Strashed Agility, 1 Strashed Specialized Skill, 2 Strashed and Strashed 7 Deadly Sins. He was satisfied by the fact that there were many routes in which development was possible, but he expected more stars. He was a Demon King and thought it was a bit unfair, but there were still a lot of things he didn't know about the power of evolution. Even though he didn't see the effects very often, there were a lot of opportunities where evolution could take place, so it could get stronger later on. The one that's getting to me the most is the 7 Deadly Sins. Out of the 7 Deadly Sins, Mammon's power was greed. Just because he was a descendant of Mammon didn't mean he could use the power of the 7 Deadly Sins. The reason why Catalina, Eligor, and even Citri was surprised was because Yong-ho had the power of the 7 Deadly Sins. The previous generation of owners couldn't even control it, but Yong-ho had it. It hasn't been awakened yet, but it was a power he could use someday. After controlling the smile he had on his face, Yong-ho coughed once and connected his conscience to the spirit of the dungeon. There was a lot to do today. So you're saying that this place is located at the most southern part of the demon world? Right, that's correct. You can call it the outskirt. During Mammon's era, all of the southern region belonged to the House of Mammon. While talking, tears started filling up Eligor's eyes. This demon cried pretty easily. Yong-ho thought Eligor was just an old demon that missed the magnificent past, but Eligor wasn't even born during Mammon's era. He turned his attention from Eligor to the window of light. It's wide. It wasn't just wide, but extremely wide. He didn't have any information to base it off and was solely making assumptions, but it seemed like it was wider than the United States. From there, Yong-ho's dungeon, the House of Mammon, was located at the most southern part. Like Eligor mentioned, it was a suburb. If this were a game, it was a border that had plenty of space around it. After wiping his tears with a handkerchief, Eligor spoke again. Currently, in the demon world, the great powers can be divided into 6. You can say that they're kings of the demon world. Within this large world, after the borders were drawn, the lands were divided into 7 different colors. In the past, it belonged to the House of Mammon, but now it was a wasteland in the south that didn't have an owner. The powerful demon kings control the 6 lands, and they command the owners within those lands. Since the demon world itself was pretty big, the nearest king's land was pretty far. In Yong-ho's perspective, despite him starting out with just 2 demons, there may come a time where he has to meet them. It was best to look into the situation. Yong-ho wasn't going to leave the dungeon in its current condition. As he gets stronger, the day when hell have to face them will come, even if he doesn't want to. That's why Citri's warning was important. He didn't need her to explain more. Yong-ho wasn't a full-blooded demon. From the perspective of the other demon heads, this kind of irregularity was rare. There is a high possibility that the others might not like Yong-ho. That's why Eligor hid me. There were 2 reasons why he called the dungeon merchant, Citri, during the ceremony instead of an owner from a different house. One was that there were no demons to call, and the other reason was to conceal the fact that Yongho ascended to the throne. The dungeon was such a mess that when one Crimson Ogre entered, they were on the verge of being killed. If a full-blooded owner from a different family decided to attack them now, they would be done for. He had a lot of things to do the more he thought about it. Being the owner of a chicken restaurant seemed more promising than being the owner of a dungeon. But Yong-ho couldn't help but smile. His bravery, no, it might be drunken courage, but despite the fact that the situation wasn't looking so good, he thought of it as a challenge. Eligor had a satisfied smile after seeing Yong-ho and continued explaining. The first thing that must be done is to recover the dungeon's function. The window of light suddenly disappeared and an aerial view of the dungeon appeared. Most parts of Mammon's dungeon were either inactive or destroyed. This is embarrassing to say, but Mammon was one of the 7 deadly sins. But out of the owners that took over the dungeon, none of them were able to revive the dungeon completely. Just finding the hidden facilities within the destroyed areas will help you in targeting the dungeon and getting the results that you want. In simple terms, it meant there were dungeons within the house that needed to be targeted. It sounds good, but it also sounds fishy. Seeing as how the previous owners weren't able to completely obtain Mammon of Greed's power, this wasn't going to be an easy task. Eligor noticed Yongho's intentions and spoke. First, it'll be better to develop the upper level, since it's safer, and go from there. It'll be better if you repel the neighboring low-level demon and increase your power. I feel like I'm currently the low-level demon here. The law of the jungle applied in the demon world. Clashing with other demons couldn't be avoided. Eligor, out of the strength type and stamina type, which do you like better? Sir Eligor blinked due to the random question. Instead of explaining, Yongho activated the power of evolution. He wasn't planning on testing it out on Eligor, but he wanted to see how he would change if he were to use it. Name: Eligor M. Race. Race: Red Demon. Main elements: Fire Darkness. Main stats: Red Demon, Strength Stamina, Development Rate, 62200D. Specialized Strength 27, 2-7ized Stamina, 2-7ized Stamina, 279T, 7ized Mana, 192. Waved his finger in the air. He lightly touched a box of light that couldn't be seen by others, and above Eligor's body, a faint silhouette appeared. Oh, no matter which route he took, Eligor would transform into a buff demon, which was different from his current form. He couldn't be sure since it was just a silhouette, but his wrinkled face might change as well. Sir, not knowing what was going on, Eligor looked at Yongho worriedly. No, it's nothing. Yongho deactivated his power and moved on. Then, they heard a voice on the other side of the door. It was the voice of Catalina, who seemed to be extremely excited. Delivery. The package is here. It's here. Both demons and humans get excited when they get a package. Yongho and Eligor looked towards the door with a bright smile. Currently, the House of Mammon had 8 rooms made out of stones. In order to receive the package, Yongho didn't have to run to the dungeon's entrance. As soon as the Demon King's room opened, Catalina entered with a cart that carried 2 large boxes. Sir, it's here. She normally acts calm, but a bright smile was on her face, and she couldn't hide her happiness. Just like before, her long ears were flapping like wings. Catalina pulled the cart in front of the throne, and after getting up from the throne, Yongho instinctively petted Catalina's head. It seemed appropriate. The box is smaller than what I imagined. The cart could only carry 1 box, so it couldn't be considered small. But like he had said, it was smaller than what he had imagined. It looked just as big as those wooden boxes that are often found at docks. Goblins are small, and they're probably curled up in that box. They're curled up in there. He thought it was absurd how they delivered a living being in a wooden box like that. However, Catalina and Eligor didn't seem bothered by it, so Yongho didn't say any more. He used his eyes to command Catalina to move the boxes down. Using her thin arms, Catalina easily placed the boxes down on the ground. I'll open them now. Okay. As soon as Yongho confirmed, Eligor ripped the seal of the dungeon shop that was stuck to the box and used a crowbar to open the box. As if the box had some sort of device, the entire box broke apart and revealed what was inside. Like Catalina and Eligor mentioned, a goblin was curled up inside. It had green skin, a large head, a long, big nose, and the knuckles on its hands and feet were bulging out. The goblin just stayed there as if they were frozen. And when Yong-ho looked at them worriedly, Eligor explained, "Once you inject mana after registering them with the dungeon spirit, they'll start working. They're currently frozen due to the dungeon shop's magic. Will you register the goblins as dungeon spirits?" The spirit of the dungeon asked Yong-ho. Yong-ho nodded his head without any hesitation. The two goblins will be registered as dungeon spirits. As soon as the voice of the dungeon finished speaking, a red pentagram appeared on top of the goblins. Yong-ho gulped. It wasn't because he had high expectations of the goblins. He felt the mana's movement. He felt it from himself to the dungeon, and from the dungeon to the goblin. Moments later, the goblins' bodies started shaking. Their large eyes suddenly opened, and they stood up from their seat. They looked up at Yong-ho with a blank stare. They were probably 100 cm tall. They were about the same height as an elementary student. They may be small, but they're talented workers. They're the best spirits since they don't eat a lot, but work hard. It's not child labor. After seeing Eligor's satisfied face, Yong-ho turned his attention back to the goblins. The goblins were still out of it. It wasn't because they've awoken, but as stated in the manual, they were usually out of it. "Sir, please give them your first order. Anything is fine," Eligor spoke, and Catalina looked back and forth between the goblins and Yong-ho. It seemed like she was expecting something, but she wasn't in the position to say what she was expecting. Yong-ho continued looking at the goblins and then shook his head. "No, not yet. If I use them like this, it seems like child labor," Sir Eligor asked with a shocked look on his face. But, instead of answering, Yong-ho took a deep breath. He activated the power of evolution. Chapter 8. Race, Goblin M, main element, Earth, main stats, strength stamina, development rate, 100 and 100. Strength, 1-5, stamina, 1-5. After officially being registered as a spirit, the categories he wasn't able to see back at the shop could be seen. Luckily, both the goblins' development skill was already at 100, is most likely because they were the weakest spirits. Eligor and Catalina continued looking at Yong-ho nervously. Instead of explaining to them, Yong-ho raised his hand. A box of light appeared on top of both the goblins' heads. The power of evolution was the Demon King's power, a power that awakened from Yong-ho's spirit and was Yong-ho himself. That's why it naturally activated. Fire rose out of Yong-ho's green eyes, and mana was released through the tip of his hand. The goblins started shaking. Eligor held his breath as he felt Yong-ho's mana being infused into the goblins. Catalina looked at Yong-ho with an uneasy expression. Moments later, green sparks enveloped the goblins. The goblins' scream filled the room. Yong-ho coughed roughly and took a step back. It was difficult. It felt like all the energy within his body was being drained out of him. But Yong-ho still smiled. Both of Eligor's hands were covering his mouth, while his eyes turned red like all the other times, and Catalina quickly helped Yong-ho. Her eyes widened when she saw the goblins. The goblins transformed. The goblin with specialized strength grew at least 15 centimeters. Their frail shoulders grew 2 folds, and their upper body transformed into the perfect inverted triangle. Even though their legs were short, their arms were huge and strong. It was like looking at a baby gorilla. The goblin with specialized stamina transformed as well. Their entire body became well balanced, and muscle appeared on their thin arms and legs. They were shorter than the other goblin, but after their crooked back had been straightened, they seemed taller than the goblin with specialized strength. This is the power of evolution. Eligor was thrilled. Catalina was still looking at the goblins with a shocked expression. Yong-ho smiled and gathered the remaining mana. He wanted to lie down and fall asleep, but he activated the power of evolution once again and looked at the goblin with specialized strength. Race, Goblin, M, level 1 spirit. Main element, Earth. Main stats, strength stamina. A development rate, 0-100. Strength 1-5, stamina 60-0. 5. A category that wasn't there before appeared. That wasn't the only thing that changed. Above the 2 boxes, a large box of light appeared. The words that appeared in it made Yong-ho feel excited. Promoted status, Hobgoblin. Promoted status. Transcend class change, no class promotion. Anything was fine. If they evolved once more, The goblins that were in front of him would go beyond being a goblin. He would be satisfied if their actual class increased as well. In the end, they're just goblins that evolved into hobgoblins. Despite being pessimistic, he couldn't wipe the smile off of his face. What's after a hobgoblin goblin, king high goblin? Are Catalina and Eligor capable of getting promoted like that? Now that I think about it. That was when Yong-ho realized that Catalina was hugging him and got worried. Maybe it's because he came to a realization, but he was able to really feel her presence through her arm, waist, and chest. Even though he was reborn as a demon king, Yong-ho was still shy around women. I do like it, but he didn't have any energy. However, leaning his body against Catalina was a natural act. That's what Yong-ho told himself, and he accepted it. With that, he leaned against her even more without any hesitation. Then, Catalina yelled, "Oh my, is that a horn?" Yong-ho flinched at Catalina's sudden remark, which caused Eligor to yell as well. On the goblins' foreheads, a small horn, no, almost a rock, was sticking out, and Eligor looked at them with tearful eyes. He collapsed to the floor and was crying tears of joy. Oh, mighty Maimon. Now, he was just bawling. That's why Yong-ho chose Catalina, since she was able to hold a decent conversation. Catalina, is it that big of a deal that the goblins have a horn on their forehead? Catalina looked at him with a dumbfounded expression. They were close, since their body was next to each other, and because of that, Catalina's pretty face was right in front of him. Catalina breathed heavily. After looking at him with a dumbfounded expression, she yelled out loud, It's amazing. Amazing indeed, and no, you're amazing. She yelled due to being overexcited, but when he saw her trying to calm herself and change her speech, he thought she was definitely a klutz. Instead of making fun of her or criticizing her, he asked once more, "Why is it amazing?" Catalina had a blank expression, but it was only for a moment. To demons, it was common knowledge, but she realized that Yong-ho has only been a demon for 3 days, so this was all new to him. After helping Yong-ho sit on the throne, she started catching her breath. She explained in her calmest manner, "In the demon world, a horn represents strength. A demon's horn plays the role of gathering mana that exists in the world. The stronger their mana is, the demon obtains more and larger horns. Of course, having a lot of large horns is uncomfortable, so most usually use magic to hide it or condense it. Anyways, that's why a horn is important. You can assume a demon's mana level based on the number of horns they have." Even though she was calmer than before, she spoke pretty fast. It seemed like she was out of breath because she stopped to gather her breath. She continued explaining after swallowing her saliva a couple of times. It's not easy to increase the number or strengthen a horn. Most demons keep the same horn they were born with. Strengthening the mana is the only way to strengthen or obtain more horns. It's different for each case B. But Catalina closed her eyes shut once after hearing Yong-ho's question. After gathering her breath again, she spoke with a calm expression. Goblins, originally, don't have horns. There are special goblins that are born with a small horn, but it's very rare. Goblins don't really have mana, so it's pretty much impossible for them to obtain more horns. But you made the horns appear, sir, having horns on those goblins. Eligor spoke last. Since he was still crying, his voice was shaking while he talked. He had an idea why Catalina was so surprised and why Eligor was so moved by it. The power of evolution. He remembered how Citrus' eyes sparkled. She introduced herself as being an important figure, and he had an idea why she was impressed by him. Yong-ho looked at the goblins again. Maybe it's the effects of evolution or the horns that they acquired, but they looked more intelligent than before. When their eyes met, they kneeled down and started stammering when they spoke. Sir, we pledge allegiance to you." Catalina opened her mouth wide this time. Eligor was getting ready to cry tears of joy again. After seeing their reaction, he assumed that goblins talking was an amazing thing. Yong-ho sat back down on the throne. He asked Catalina, who was still shocked. It was about the horns. Chapter 9. How come I don't have a horn? Yong-ho's question was very simple. Why he didn't have a horn. If having a horn is that important to a demon, and if it's related to the mana that they have, then how come Yong-ho, who was a demon king, didn't have one? Was it because he was half human? Catalina had a surprised look on her face, and her eyes started blinking. Eligor also looked at Yong-ho with a surprised expression. Huh? What's wrong? Well, you see, you do have a horn. Yong-ho blinked his eyes after Catalina quietly answered him. Catalina carefully raised both of her hands and pointed to the small horns that were located above her ears. It's in the same location as mine. Yong-ho was really shocked, but he somewhat understood it. Yong-ho noticed that he hadn't seen a mirror once since he became the owner of the House of Mammon. He did feel something when he was washing his hair, but he didn't think those were horns. This damn dungeon doesn't even have a mirror. Yong-ho followed Catalina and placed both of his hands above his ears. He asked, "These are horns?" Instead of answering him, Catalina nodded. It's because Yong-ho's face and voice were filled with disappointment. I'm a demon king, and yet I only have 2 horns. They were really small too. They were more like rocks than horns. No, not even rocks. It was more like his bones were slightly sticking out. No wonder he wasn't able to recognize it before. It's because it hasn't been that long since you became the owner. The dungeon's power will soon be yours. When the dungeon grows, your powers will grow stronger as well. It applies both ways. Eligor quickly explained. Catalina nodded her head once and turned into the cold, intellectual woman he met during their first meeting. It's true that one obtains more horns the more powerful they become. However, the number of horns and their sizes don't necessarily represent one's power. Yong-ho knew that behind that cold mask she was a klutz, but since she was speaking with a straight face, he decided to take her seriously. Well, there's still a lot I need to work on. All he had to do was get stronger, like Eligor mentioned. It was too early for him to feel disappointed. After calming himself, Yong-ho looked at Catalina again. It's because he was getting more curious. You said that demons tend to reduce or hide their horns, right? Yes. Yong-ho continued looking at Catalina, and thankfully, Catalina understood what Yong-ho meant. She spoke again after clearing her throat. Ahem. I will now open the mana. Since there was no reason to stop her, Yong-ho crossed his arms and nodded. Catalina took a step back, and after breathing in deeply, she released her power. The change in mana open. This was the mana of the spirit that was connected to the dungeon. Yong-ho definitely felt it. It felt like he was seeing it with his eyes. Catalina's mana. Her spirit. The mana and spirit's color and attribute. Ha ha ha. Catalina stood up straight after catching her breath. Above her 2 long ears, yellow horns that were the size of a thumb and index finger added together grew out. As expected, they weren't that big. It looked more like an elephant's ivory rather than a deer's antler. Maybe it's because she released her power, because there was a different aura around her. She seemed more keen. After staring at her horns, Yong-ho stood up from the throne and asked, "Hey, can I touch them?" "Why, yes." Master Catalina's face turned red, but it felt strange. She slightly tilted her head down with 2 fists clenched. She lightly bit her lips, and the way her eyes moved made it seem like she was filled with nervousness, anxiety, and a bit of fear. Yong-ho gulped after catching on to the odd feeling. He slowly extended his hand and touched Catalina's horn. When his hand touched it, Catalina flinched and her shoulders shook a bit, but that was all. The horns were cold, soft, and hard. It was true when they said that the horns were connected to one's mana, because every time he moved his fingers, he felt Catalina's mana. The reason why Catalina was flinching was because she felt the mana's movement. I should stop. He felt like he was getting addicted to it. As someone that attended an all-boys school, this was too much. Yong-ho quickly pulled his hand away and stepped back. Catalina let out a small sigh of relief. Yong-ho felt like an employer that was using their power to control their employees. And then, "You can touch my horn as well." Eligor pushed his head towards him and spoke. Unlike Catalina, his horn was a light gray horn and was located on his forehead. It resembled a rhinoceros horn. Remembering how Catalina reacted when he touched her horn, instead of touching Eligor's horn, he stepped to the side. He looked at the 2 goblins and spoke. "Anyways, you 2 now have horns. Master, I can give you 2 names, right?" Yong-ho ignored Eligor's question once again and asked. The spirit of the dungeon answered, "Would you like to register the dungeon spirits' names?" Yong-ho nodded his head instead of answering and thought for a moment. If what Eligor said was true, then there will be more of these guys within the dungeon later on. However, since these two were the first ones, he wanted to give them special names. Whatever ill, just give them any name, as long as they're easy and unique names. On top of that, since they were names that the goblins had to memorize, using easy names was the best. Your name is John, and you're Ron. The goblins blinked after hearing the names, and a wide smile appeared on their faces. John, Ron, Ron. The power type was John, and the stamina type was Ron. The two goblins repeated their names several times, and bowed their heads towards Yong-ho Master. Thank you, thank you. Happy, happy. The spirits are happy. The employee satisfaction level has increased. A smile appeared on Yong-ho's face as well. This time, Catalina asked, "Excuse me, Master Huh? Are you able to use the power of evolution on anyone?" He was expecting her to ask that question, and Yong-ho was prepared to answer. But Eligor was different. Eligor looked at Catalina fiercely, and Catalina's eyes widened as she flinched. After realizing what kind of question she asked, she kneeled down right away. She tilted her head down in front of Yong-ho. "I apologize for overstepping the boundary. I ask that you forgive me." Her ears were shaking, and he felt bad about it. Yong-ho was shocked, but he understood why this happened. For a demon king, their power was their strongest weapon. Catalina was only a spirit that belonged to the dungeon, but she was requesting him to tell her his biggest secret. It seems like the previous owner wasn't really laid back. After letting out a deep sigh, Yong-ho lowered himself and helped Catalina stand up. She still couldn't look at Yong-ho, so he spoke to her as calmly as he could. "Well, you two are spirits that belong to the dungeon. Unlike the other spirits, you two are special. So, asking questions like that is fine. The satisfaction level doesn't increase." He expected them to say that their impression of him increased, but the spirit of the dungeon didn't answer. However, since Eligor and Catalina both looked touched, Yong-ho was satisfied. He continued talking with a smile. "I can use the power of evolution on you two as well. You two might become stronger." "Oh, so that's why you asked that question before?" Eligor spoke quietly, as if he suddenly remembered it. It seemed like he remembered the time when Yong-ho asked whether strength was better or stamina was better. "Catalina, would you like me to evolve you as well?" Catalina's face turned red at Yong-ho's question, but it was only for a moment. She quickly turned her attention to the goblins and answered nervously. Having a large body is a bit. As a female, it seemed like she didn't like it. Yong-ho jokingly moved his finger, and even though she closed her eyes shut, she didn't move a muscle. Yong-ho laughed out loud and lightly flicked Catalina's forehead. "I can't do it right now. When you fulfill the requirement, I'll let you know. Also, there are different ways you can be evolved." When she felt Yong-ho's hand, Catalina slightly opened her eyes and nodded her head. Her two ears were of course drooping. "I'll become addicted if I don't be careful." Pulling pranks on her was fun. Yong-ho turned his attention from Catalina to Eligor, and, as if he was waiting, Eligor spoke. He looked prepared. "Sir, there's something I have to tell you." Since his expression looked so serious, Yong-ho's expression became serious as well. As soon as Yong-ho nodded his head, Eligor spoke. "We still have some emergency funds left. It's not the House of Maimon's asset, they're assets that I saved up in case of an emergency." As soon as he finished talking, Eligor took out a small bag from his chest. Catalina looked like she didn't know about this at all, because her eyes widened due to the shock. "It's not much, but you'll be able to purchase a 1-star spirit with it. For low-rank spirits like the goblin, you'll be able to purchase 4 of them." Eligor pushed the bag towards him. Yong-ho wasn't sure what to do during this situation, so Eligor placed the bag in Yong-ho's hand and bowed his head. "Please forgive me for being disrespectful. This old spirit was hiding this money all this time so that it can only be used during an emergency. But I was sure of it after seeing your power. You're the only one that can revive the House of Maimon." As always, tears filled both of his eyes. Catalina was also on the verge of crying. "I beg of you, Master, please use this money. The dungeon needs more spirits right now." He understood why Eligor gave him the money. Now Yong-ho lightly bit his lip. He honestly didn't like these melodramatic situations, but he understood how Eligor felt. What were they thinking when they first visited Yong-ho? Were they dreaming of the moment when the house of Maimon would be revived again? That's probably not it. All they wanted was to extend the time before the dungeon completely died. But Eligor was now dreaming of the moment when the house of Maimon would be revived. Honestly, he felt pressured by Eligor. He did this in order to be more cautious, and even though it was his own money, the fact that he was hiding it seemed a bit disgraceful. But that didn't mean that Yong-ho disliked Eligor. In the end, Yong-ho put on a smile. I've accepted it, Eligor, today as well. In order to enter the labor market, Yong-ho sat on the throne. This is an unexpected visit. Chapter 10. Oh my, this is an unexpected visit. As soon as he entered the white room, Citri greeted him with a surprised expression. This time, she was wearing a red dress instead of her usual purple dress, but the degree of exposure was still the same. Anyone could tell that she was acting, so he intentionally acted like he was relaxed. I think you said you weren't fully in charge of this place. Citri's eyes widened, and she put on the most charming smile. It felt like her smile could melt away any evil plans. Yong-ho tried to remain calm, but it was difficult. Since Yong-ho was weak against women, just being within Citri's presence made him weak. But it didn't mean that he was staring at her with his mouth wide open. He felt his earlobes turn red, and he coughed a couple of times. Citri smiled again. A white table appeared behind her, and she leaned her butt against it and spoke. Just because I'm an important figure doesn't mean I'm always busy. And honestly, I had a feeling. You're contradicting what you said earlier. Citri was a beautiful woman, and she knew just how beautiful she was. Because of that, she displayed a beautiful smile after hearing Yong-ho's comment. Moments later, the table transformed into a chair, and as she sat on the chair, she crossed her legs. She was staring at Yong-ho. You've used the power of evolution. Yong-ho was inexperienced. That's why he flinched and couldn't hide his nervousness. But Citri was satisfied with that Yong-ho just recently ascended to the throne. Making a big fuss and not completely showing his emotions was enough. You don't need to be on your guard. Other than me, no one else knows that my lovely customer has become the head of the family of Mammon, or that you've become the demon of evolution. He wanted to ask whether it would be noticeable if he used the skill, but decided not to. Instead, he asked something else. Do you know of any other demon of evolution besides me? Citri didn't answer right away. She changed her position and placed her chin on the back of her hand. After thinking for a bit, spoke. It happened a long time ago. But the person that I know of and your evolution skill isn't completely the same. It's safe to say that the power is the Demon King's soul. Yong-ho didn't ask more questions. Citri was kind and beautiful, and although she seemed to like Yong-ho, she wasn't completely on his side. Yong-ho could only trust Catalina and Eligor. When Yong-ho didn't ask more questions, Citri stood up from her seat. She approached Yong-ho and stood about 3 steps away from him. A small white table appeared before Citri and Yong-ho. I would like to provide you with a small gift as a way to apologize for my rudeness. Are you okay with it? Go on between her cleavage. It seemed like there was some sort of bag between her cleavage because she took something out of there last time too. She took out 3 small leather bags and placed them on the table. Out of the 7 deadly sins, greed has deep relationships with wealth. If I were to use an expression from your world, you're lucky when it comes to money. Since he was the demon of greed, it made sense. She placed her long, slim finger on top of the leather bags. She caught his attention. Among them, there's a coupon that allows you to purchase a rank 2 spirit. If you can find it with just 1 try, I'll give it to you as a present. And if I were to give you a hint, don't think about it. Grab the bag that you want. Citri put on a smile after she finished talking. Yong-ho looked at the bags and immediately grabbed the bag that was in the middle. Yong-ho was surprised by how he grabbed it without any hesitation. It was as if his hand had a mind of its own. Citri opened the bag in front of him. A green gem that was as big as a thumbnail was inside the bag. You've done well. And then she opened the other bags to let him check. They were empty. Luck in wealth. It was definitely useful. It was a good skill. But Yong-ho couldn't help but be a bit disappointed. Is having luck in wealth the only power that greed has, despite it being one of the 7 deadly sins? Citri noticed. She waved her slim index finger in front of Yong-ho. This isn't the only power greed has. This is just a small portion of its power. Don't be disappointed by it. What she said was helpful, but the fact that she was able to read his mind made him feel uncomfortable. Yong-ho grabbed the green gem that Citri placed on the table and spoke. Thank you for your service. The information regarding greed's power and the coupon that allowed him to purchase spirits. Citri was satisfied when he thanked her for her service. This time, she pulled out a large book from thin air and placed it on the table. It was extremely big and thick, which made him think of an English dictionary. Unlike the low-level spirits that you purchased last time, for spirits that are at least rank 1, we provide a catalog like this. And there are 2 types within the catalog: a free labor market and a slave market. Out of all the words that he heard after stepping into this world, it was the darkest word, and yet it felt natural for them to have one. Citri explained. Spirits that are registered in the free labor market are spirits that are trying to find a master to serve. Even if there's a spirit that you want to employ, you may not be able to employ them. The spirits are given the chance to choose their master, and the slave market doesn't have that. That's correct. Like the name, they're slaves. Spirits are usually sent to this market because they're not smart, are self-conscious, were created, and for other reasons as well. The free labor market has a variety of spirits and are a lot smarter and stronger. But in the slave market, there are times when you get your money's worth. You don't need to negotiate with the spirit, and compared to the free labor market, the spirits are a lot cheaper. So there are a lot of owners that prefer to use this market. Yong-ho looked at the green gem that was in his hand. And I can only use this in the slave market, right? You're very smart, my lovely customer. It was common sense to figure these things out. In the current situation, there probably won't be any spirits that would be willing to form a contract. On top of that, if he hired those spirits, then rumors about the House of Mammon having a new owner will spread. Citri turned the book around so that Yong-ho could read it. This was the first time he's seen this world's letters, but the moment he saw it, he was able to understand it. Rank 2 Spirit Catalog, Slave Market. Have fun shopping, my lovely customer. With a smile on her face, Citri took a step back and, just like before, disappeared into thin air. And a couple of seconds later, she's a tiring one. I miss the simple-minded Catalina. I miss her. Yong-ho yawned due to his tiredness and sat on the chair that appeared behind him. Great. Anyways, it was free, and if he gets lucky, he'll get his money's worth. No, he would be satisfied with an ordinary spirit too. Yong-ho opened the catalog. He didn't think he would be able to obtain a rank 2 spirit for free. But Yong-ho didn't enter virtual space to shop impulsively. He originally was going to purchase a rank 1 spirit. He had a plan. First, purchase a spirit for battle. 2. Obtain a low-level spirit that will strengthen the military power. Currently, Catalina was the only soldier that could actually fight. If there was really a battle, he was going to use the 2 goblins in battle, and he was going to fight as well. But using the workers as defense was the last resort. Because of that, Yong-ho inspected Catalina first. Since she was a half succubus and half dark elf, Catalina was able to use daggers, arrows, and throwing knives. She was an attacker that could do both close and long-range attacks, but when comparing to an MMORPG, her class would be a thief. The new spirit he was going to purchase would act as a dungeon shield and will be working with Catalina. That's why he needed to purchase one with Catalina's weakness in mind so that they could work together as a team. What would an attack need from the defense line? Another long-range attacker. A tanker is the answer. They'll be working as the dungeon's gatekeeper anyways, so mobility wasn't that important. What he needed was a spirit with a large build and had the potential to develop further. Let's check it out anyways. It didn't cost money to go eye shopping. If he observed the spirit that he was going to purchase later, it'll help him with his purchase plan. He was honestly nervous. Even in games, he would get nervous when he was asked to choose characters for a team. Wow! The spirit's names and physical looks were definitely different. A hellhound that spit out fire. A bugbear that had a large build and had superhuman strength. A large slime that used strong acid. He couldn't use the power of evolution because he had to save his mana. But just looking at the catalog was quite fun. On top of that, the spirits weren't just printed on a piece of paper. Every time Yong-ho turned the page, a large screen that was floating in the air would display the spirit. Yong-ho was able to see the spirits in their natural state, and it was like looking at a hologram. Terrors, not a lot I can choose from though. Even though he took his time looking at the catalogue, it didn't take him long to finish it. Under the rank 2 spirits, there was a total of 15 species. Like Citri explained before, most of them were either self-conscious or weren't that smart. I guess they don't have an elf. No one was in that room. But Young Ho coughed, and after waving his finger, 3 spirits that he saved before were displayed on the screen. He activated the power of evolution.